Hello, everyone. I'm Maddie Grider, the Communications and Marketing Associate at the Kentucky Center for Agriculture and Rural Development, or KCARD for short. And today I'm with our Executive Director, Brent Lackey, and we're going to chat just a little bit about co-ops and how KCARD can work with co-ops as a cooperative development center. So Brent, do you want to just introduce yourself and KCARD really quickly?
Great, Maddie. Thanks for the quick introduction. Again, Brent Lackey, the Executive Director for KCARD. Been the Executive Director for over a year now, but I've been with KCARD for over 17 years now. KCARD is a nonprofit organization that's independent, that is set up to provide business advisory services to ag-based businesses, co-ops, and beginning farmers and other producers across the state of Kentucky. Specifically, one of our roles is a corporate development center, but we also do a wide range of other clients, working with business planning to marketing assistance. We also do some grant facilitation work where we try to find the right funds for clients. We also have a Kentucky Ag Vets program. There's a lot more information about KCARD you can find at kcard.info.
Yeah, great. So just to kind of give some context to our conversation today, can you talk just a little bit about what a cooperative development center is and why KCARD is one?
A co-op development center is a center designed to kind of provide some hands-on assistance to groups who are interested in forming a business structure as a cooperative, or existing cooperatives who need some assistance in managing that business. Cooperative centers exist because they are a unique business structure. You don't see as many cooperatives down the road, and they do require, because they require groups of people. You have groups of people that are investing their money together. You want to make sure that they are going through the right processes and that they're governed properly. And that's where a co-op development center comes in. We can really provide that hands-on assistance. There's lots of, one thing I always say is there's lots of guides and information on the internet that you can find available, but really having that collective knowledge within your staff to be able to sit down with that group when they're thinking about forming a co-op and ask the key questions, make sure they understand those things, and being available throughout the process. KCARD became a cooperative development center because KCARD was formed in 2001 when the master settlement agreement that just happened, which was really kind of started the end of the tobacco era in Kentucky. Especially, Kentucky ag leaders were looking to diversify Kentucky ag away from just tobacco, and they were looking at a lot of different things that could potentially boost economic income across the state. And you had a couple of examples of Hopkinsville Elevator, a grain elevator co-op, and you had Cumberland Farm Products, at the time, a very successful vegetable marketing co-op, as examples of how groups of farmers had come together. So there was an interest in having more cooperatives be developed throughout the state at that time, and also they knew that groups of farmers would be working together at the end of the tobacco era. So one of the roles that KCARD wanted to take on when it launched was to be that co-op development center in Kentucky. We've received rural cooperative development grant funds from USDA every year since 2001 to perform that function in Kentucky.
Right. So just zooming out, what actually is a cooperative?
A cooperative, in really simple terms, is a business owned by the people who are utilizing the services. They control it. The people that control it, the people that benefit from it, the people that use the services are the people that own it. But unlike other businesses, co-ops are not profit driven or controlled by one individual. The purpose of the co-op is kind of to meet the economic needs of that whole group of people. And as a result of that co-op, those benefits pass on to those individuals, and their net farm income or their net income increases because they're a member of that co-op. Lots of times people do get confused, but they think cooperatives are nonprofits, and that's not true. They do have a not-for-profit motive in that they're going to pass on those profits to their members, but they do have to operate with some income to continue operating. So.
Yeah, and you mentioned this a little bit already, but what would you say the unique features are of a cooperative, and kind of how is it different from any other business structure?
Cooperatives have really three distinctive economic principles, and I always say that's the litmus test to determine if you are truly wanting to start a co-op or if a business is acting as a cooperative. If you can pass the test for these three different economic principles. One would be user ownership. The people who use the co-op services or purchase its products or market their products through the co-op are the ones who own the business. They're responsible for providing some of the initial capital, and they also, they own the business. User controlled. The members of the co-op or members, the patrons of that business are the ones who actually govern the business and set the policies. Co-ops operate on a very, very important principle is one member, one vote. And what that means is that each member of the co-op, regardless if if it's an ag co-op, regardless if it's the largest farmer in the group or the smallest farmer in the group, they all get one member, they all get one vote at the table. It's determined by members. That vote is determined by membership, not investment. And so when they go to the annual meeting, every co-op, every member gets that one vote, and then they determine how the business is governed. And then finally, it's user benefited at a proportion, and it's especially proportionate to those who use the co-op the most. The purpose of that co-op is to provide and distribute benefits to their members. And these benefits may include better prices on goods, it might be improved services, and also it could be net profits of the co-op, and they are going to be distributed to those members based on the ones who utilize the co-op the most. If I'm the largest, if you and I are both tomato farmers, Maddie, vegetable marketing co-op, and I've got 10 acres and you've got 1 acre, and we're both marketing our whole crop through there, obviously I should have 10 times as many tomatoes to market through there if I'm any type of farmer at all. Therefore, I'm utilizing the co-op the most and going to see more benefits than you. But going back to the second principle, when we come to vote at the annual meeting, we're treated the same. So,
Right. So thinking about that, is there anything different about an agricultural cooperative?
realistically, an ag co-op is like any other type of business. There's different types of co-ops, and agriculture co-op is one of them. But in reality, the business structure is very much similar. The one key difference in Kentucky, to start an agriculture co-op, you have to have 5 producers who are willing to be members of the co-op when you incorporate that co-op. Versus any other type of co-op in Kentucky, you only require 3 members to start a co-op. So that's one key difference. But for the most part, a cooperative is true. The business structure of the co-op is very similar, whether it's an ag co-op or a utility co-op or a food grocery co-op. So.
Yeah, so when you're thinking about different business structures, what would you say the benefits of operating as a co-op are, and maybe what are the challenges too?
The key benefit of that co-op is it truly exists to meet the members' needs. I mean, that's probably the number one benefit is that, it truly is in existence to provide economic or other benefits to those members, whether it's greater access to inputs that they have a hard time getting a hold of, or there's a market that they can't get on their own, or it could be access, or it could be, lots of times food co-ops have been started years ago because they wanted access to products that Kroger or Walmart weren't carrying on the shelf. So you get access to products that you can't get somewhere else. And that the focus of that co-op is truly on meeting those members' needs, not on investment and not on profit, which is not the typical business in the United States, which is very more profit driven. Also true, a benefit is they truly are owned and controlled by their members, and that increased control allows that co-op to stay in the community, allows those profits to stay in the community, and the profit, that has a local economic development benefit as well. Also, there also can be some political power when you have a large number of members of ships that has a stake in that co-op. When that co-op speaks, they're speaking not just for one member, they could be speaking for thousands depending on the size of that co-op. Now, some disadvantages the corporate things that make it difficult is, it is true, it's controlled by its members in a democratic process. Democracy is a wonderful principle, and I'm so thankful for it for our country's sake. But democracy is hard. Getting people to really be able to vote, invest in that democratic process, to be able to control that co-op where people can stay unified, even though when they maybe don't like how the outcome of that vote came, where they can still remain processed, and that it makes it difficult. Also, there can be sometimes co-ops move at a slower pace because you are talking, it's a group principle and you're having to get people on board to get together. You just can't instantly say, oh, we're going to do this today at the co-op and go do it, or we're going to start this co-op today and go do it. It truly is, it requires that group principle in place to really get things going. And also sometimes traditional co-ops at times had a harder time attracting investment to get that co-op off the ground, because if I'm going to invest in something, normally I would like to have I would like to have some control in it. So that might limit where you can have your investment in, because if we're talking about starting a grain elevator co-op, and I might be a person in the community who would like to see that grain elevator happen, but if I am not a grain farmer, then the only way my investment goes in, generally speaking, as a preferred shareholder, and I have no control or no vote. So losing control, it makes it difficult to attract investment.
Right. So with that in mind, when you're thinking maybe about starting a co-op, what are the major things that you should consider before you really decide that that's the structure that really makes sense for you?
There's 4 or 5 things that kind of show that whether or not a co-op is a good fit for what's going on. One is that you have member synergy. Do you have 3 or 5 members who are really in line with who are excited about this business idea, ready to work together to make it happen, and who are willing to really lay everything, to put a lot of energy in getting this business off the ground. Um, One of the things, if you, whenever I hear someone say, I want to start a co-op, it always makes me cringe a little bit, because it's truly a group project, not an individual project. And you really have to have 3 or 5 core members who are really dedicated to doing this and working hard to make it happen. Secondly, are the group members willing to have shared ownership? Are they willing to share business decisions? Are they willing to invest in that democratic process? Or do they want total control of the business? We have had some groups in Kentucky who have, some nonprofits even, who have wanted to start a co-op to benefit producers, but once we told them they would lose control of the business, they recognized that the cooperative wasn't necessarily the right business structure for them. Third, is there shared vision? And this needs to be very specific. It can't be, because entrepreneurs and farmers, and lots of them have wonderful ideas. And if you start bringing these ideas, but this co-op's got to really be focused on one thing. What is that shared vision? What is that shared mutual need of its members? It can't be a thing that one size meets all. Then it breaks off in different pieces and it's hard to get going. And finally, is it truly a member-driven purpose? Are we worried about really maximizing the profits of the members, not necessarily the business? If those things happen, are there, then you can move forward. That's when a co-op makes the most sense.
Right. So let's say you've decided that's the structure that makes sense for you. You want to go forward. What does the process to start that co-op look like? Kind of what are the first steps to take?
The first step is, okay, an individual or a group of individuals are sitting around a coffee shop and they got this idea. Well, they start banging that idea around each other and see, is this business idea something that you think other people in the community might buy into? Do a little bit of research to make sure that there is some pre-feasibility work. Okay, this idea makes some sense. There's other ones like this out there, or there's truly a hole in the marketplace that we could meet. And that's just initial business idea. And then if you think you've got a dog that'll hunt, then you look to see, then you want to gather other people in the area to see who all would be interested in this idea. And from that, and this is probably the most important, the first big step is the formation of what I call a steering committee. And that steering committee is, okay, we got a group of people that, yeah, we like this idea. We want to make it work. We want to help start the co-op. And I'm willing to invest a lot of hours and a lot of nights or weekends or time to get this co-op off the ground, to make sure we do that development process. And that steering committee really acts as the board for that co-op before it becomes incorporated. It's the group that's going to make decisions. They're going to figure out, are we going through the right steps to make this happen, and really devoting a lot of time to push it forward, even when they're outside schedules. Then you kind of want to look at, it's generally, especially if it's a capital intensive project, you want to do a feasibility study, a comprehensive feasibility study that really looks at the, the marketing requirements, what's the financial returns going to be to make sure it's a good idea. If it's not a hugely capital intensive project, you can maybe just do, some simple feasibility work to make sure everything looks right. If the feasibility looks good, then you're going to incorporate, then the next big three steps kind of happen simultaneously. One, you're going to work on your organizational documents. You're going to work on getting your articles of incorporation and your bylaws put together. There are templates that are available. There cooperative development centers such as KCARD can help you put those organizational documents together. However, we will always recommend that the lawyer brought in at least for a review process, if not the whole process, to make sure everything looks legally correct, because we're not lawyers at KCARD, but we can't help you get way down the road with those bylaws and articles without having a lawyer be involved with every step. Two, another step, the other big step in this process is developing a business plan that really outlines what this business is going to look like. What's the mission and vision of the co-op? What are the goals? What's the marketing plan look like? Who are our customers going to be? How is our product and service unique? How are we going to compete in the marketplace? Look at the management and the operations plan. Who's going to manage this thing? What are the skills and requirements we're looking for? What are the other key personnel? Also, how are we going to operate? What are the regulatory requirements? And then finally, have a set of financial projections that kind of show what the business looks like and how profitable it can be. And at that same time, while you're working on the business plan, while you're working on your organizational documents, you plan your membership drive, and you will probably launch that membership drive when you've kind of finished your articles and finished your business plan, but kind of simultaneously at the same time to really have, and there's different ways to do a membership drive. It can be community meetings. It can be various ways. It can be social media driven, but just ways to see, are there interested members out there? We think that, like example, for food co-ops, they normally were looking to have 300 or 500 members be a member of that co-op when it first started. Can we truly find 300 or 500 people that are interested in starting this thing? Then finally, then the next thing is, all right, we've got our members, we've got our business plan. Now we need to raise money to get this thing off the ground. Some of it's going to come from your membership. Some of it's probably going to be some debt capital as well. And then when you get everything, then you launch operations. So.
Right. So you mentioned capital and financials a little bit, but could you talk a little bit more about how a co-op is typically financed?
Co-ops are typically financed in 3 or 4 buckets. One would be through its membership, through its general members, and that would, generally speaking, that would come in co-ops can be either stock co-ops or non-stock co-ops. Most co-ops are typically stock co-ops. Now, the one thing, there's generally limitations on how much common shares a member can buy because it's to abide by that one member, one vote rule. So typically a co-op will, a member can only buy 1 share of common stock. If they can buy multiple shares, then there's still a restriction and every member can buy that same number. So you still get that one member, one vote. So then that shares of that common stock can be used as a way to raise money. Now that becomes a decision many new co-ops start. Do we want to set our common share price in a way where we raise a lot of equity and capital and have a smaller number of members, or do we want to make sure this is an easy way to get a lot of people in and have that common share price low? And that's an equilibrium that steering committee is kind of balanced. What's our goal here with our common share purchases? So that's kind of the first bucket. The second bucket, and this another bucket of investment equity with a traditional co-op. There's some new generation co-ops that we're not going to get into today, but for traditional co-op, you kind of have what we call preferred stock or preferred shares that can be issued. Those are available to members and non-members. Let's say that there's an organic dairy cooperative being started that's going to, then you might have people in the community or people in the general in the landscape who would like to invest in an organic process or an organic project, or there's we used to have a grain elevator in our community. It's no longer here. it's going to be structured as a co-op. I'd like to invest in it to help get it off the ground. So you could have non-members being investing in that co-op. What those have, generally speaking, you can have multiple shares of those. Generally speaking, a guaranteed dividend is guaranteed to those preferred shareholders as long as the board of directors doesn't feel like it hinders the cash flow of the operation. However, that dividend is normally set, generally speaking, slightly higher than interest rates at the bank, but lower than what you could typically get from if you invested in the stock market. So it's normally not a huge rate of return, though with interest rates these days, that rate might be a little higher than what we typically have, but you're normally looking at 5 to 7% rate of return that you're guaranteed every year until and you hold it, and you can't liquidate all your shares for so many years. You know that when you buy it in. Now, the one other drawback with preferred shareholders is they don't have any vote at the membership meeting. They have no votes. They have no control in the co-op. They're truly investing in that group and truly trusting that they're going to be okay. So those are your two primary sources of equity. There are sometimes, I hate to mention this, there's sometimes some grant funds available for new businesses and new cooperatives. Just because you're a cooperative doesn't mean you're all of a sudden in line for this magic bucket of grant money. That doesn't exist, but there are some potential funds available for grant, especially for ag co-ops in Kentucky and others. But so that would be another potential source. And then finally, you're looking at, more than likely you're probably going to have the debt financing to the rest of the co-op. I know most banks. I know CoBank, for example, wants to have at least a 40% equity or 40% investment of owners or other equity in the co-op before they'll loan the remaining 60%. Some banks will do the common 80-20 rule, but lots of times with co-ops, you're looking at probably closer to having 40% equity before you can get the remaining debt capital. So.
Right. So continuing to kind of think through some of the details, how is a co-op typically structured and governed, and how do you elect a board?
The structure of a co-op is you have three different levels of management at a co-op, or three groups of players. And that organizational structure looks at the very top of the organizational structure, which is unusual, are the members of the co-op. The people that utilize its services, the people that market their tomatoes to the vegetable co-op, the people that that get their electricity through the local rural electric co-op. Those memberships are at their very top. And then they exercise their democratic control at what I call and generally speaking, most co-ops have 1 to 2 meetings of all their members a year, one big annual meeting, and sometimes a specially called meeting. Then the next level is the board of directors, and that is comprised of your membership base. Anyway, the number is determined in the bylaws of how many board members you have on your board of directors. KCARD normally recommends 7 or 9. That way you don't have too many people in the room, and you also have an odd number for a case so they're to break a tie. But those board of directors are elected by the members at the annual meeting. We generally recommend that those board of directors have like a 3-year term, so you're not constantly overturning it, and then having staggered terms, so you're not electing the same 7 or 9 spots every year, so you only have a handful of spots up for election every year. But those people are elected at the annual meeting on that 1 member, 1 vote basis. Generally recommend that you have some type of nominating committee that nominates those board members unless the members know who's going to be on the ballot before they get there. And then also generally speaking, it's better to do secret ballot because it can be kind of awkward raising your hand next to your friend who's on the ballot that you're not voting for. So So final bucket, I'm sorry, of this is your general manager of the co-op. Your paid management, and that person, the board of directors kind of provides, does the 10,000, does the long-term things, looks to, kind of sets the course for the co-op. And then you have that general manager who really is responsible for the day-to-day operations of the co-op to really enact what the policies that the board is elected them to do, is charged him or her to do, and carry out that business like any other manager or owner of a business on that day-to-day operations.
Right. So switching gears just a little bit, is there anything that people should know when it comes to taxes for co-ops?
The big thing with co-ops, especially when you compare it to other business structures, is co-ops have what you call single level taxation. And what that means is that from an income tax perspective, the profits of the co-op are only going to be taxed at either the co-op level, meaning the co-op will pay them, or they'll be passed on to the members and the membership will pay them. You won't have to, if the co-op pays them and then they pass on the profits to the members, they do not have to pay income taxes on those dividends that they receive, which are based on their patronage of the co-op. Or if you do what's called a qualified allocation, which gets really technical, we could spend an hour on how that works. But if you did a qualified allocation of the profits to their members based on their patronage, then the membership would be responsible for their income, for the income taxes, and the co-op itself, the business, would not pay any income tax, pay any corporate income taxes.
Yeah, so I know this seems to be kind of a common question when it comes to thinking about the future of the co-op. So what happens when a member leaves the co-op?
When that member leaves the co-op, then they're no longer a co-op. They no longer have a vote at the table. They no longer, um, you know, whether or not they're allowed to continue doing business with that co-op is up to the co-op on what their rules are with dealing with members and non-members. Because non-members can sometimes still do business with a co-op. Then finally, they are allowed to ask for any equity or profits that were kind of allocated to them over time, either their initial common share purchase and then any profits that have been allocated to them but not been redeemed in cash at that point. They are welcome to ask for that. And then generally speaking, the board will honor that request unless they feel like, hey, if we redeem all of this at one time, it could harm the operations of the co-op. So the co-op can still retain that money until they feel it's best to pay that out to that member who's no longer in the co-op.
Okay, so just to start wrapping up a little bit, what are the key factors to help ensure that a cooperative will be successful?
One is making sure you have that unified vision and goals, that you really truly, that all the members that are all have that same vision and that same goal. And and I've witnessed co-ops that started out with that unified vision and goals, and then years later that vision splintered, those goals splintered, and generally speaking, as a result, it splintered the co-op because people had different interests in different, and sometimes it was neither side was necessarily wrong. It was just that vision had changed, and it was hard, and the co-op wasn't big enough to be able to serve as both visions, so it kind of splintered the co-op. But having that unified vision is so important to the co-op. Having commitment and leadership from its members, especially in those early years, to really be to provide, put in that time and effort to get it off the ground, to be supportive of the co-op, to supportive of any paid management that you have, and to make sure that you're looking for other outside organizations to provide support to the co-op. But really having that commitment that, hey, I'm all in, I'm going to make this work. This is having those core members really committed to doing that, not just show up to the meeting when it's convenient for them. Then it comes down to the things that are important for every business. Do you have sufficient financing? Do you have enough money to be able to build your operations to the scale they need to be? And do you have enough working capital or cash in the bank to be able to cover your expenses and not worry about making payroll, and be able to cover your debts and liabilities even during lean times of the year? That sufficient financing is important for any business. And then also having competent management, having that at the board level, and then also at the paid level, that general manager, having management that is qualified and that's experienced and it truly can manage those day-to-day business operations in an effective manner. Having a co-op, having a general manager of a co-op who A is competent, B is really good at managing the operations, really worrying about the cost and watching over putting in controls in place to make sure the co-op is doing what it's supposed to be, overseeing the marketing efforts of that co-op, but most importantly, treating that co-op, even though they're a general manager, even though they're not an owner of the business, but treating that business like they do own that business. Living and dying with that business, putting in the time, its effort to make sure that co-op makes it happen, and worrying about that co-op as if they own that business is crucially important to co-ops. Co-ops that generally make it, that are very successful, have that core general manager who really runs that business and watches the pennies of the co-op as if it was their own business.
Yeah, those are some really good points. Is there anything that we haven't discussed so far that people should really know about co-ops or about working with KCARD?
One thing with co-ops that we generally touched on, but not a lot, was kind of the allocation of profits. And one thing to talk about, and I mentioned it there, was what you have with a co-op. Profits are generally allocated to the members based on patronage, which means that the person who, if you and I are members of that tomato marketing co-op, again, out, Maddie, and if the co-op has a $50,000 profit, and my tomatoes were 10% of the business and yours were 5%, then that 50,000, 10% of that 50,000 or 5,000 would be allocated to me. Now the co-op doesn't have to, that doesn't mean they just write me a check for 5,000. They allocate it to my equity account, and then the board of directors decides how much cash to give to their members of that profit, to give that over. But that's kind of a general basis of how the patronage, dividends, or return of profits works in the co-op. As far as working with KCARD is, we've got currently 11 very qualified staff people at KCARD who are very devoted to working and advancing Kentucky agriculture and working. And we've actually just had 3. I have co-op management experience, but we also had 3 individuals who went through cooperative development training. So we are trying to become we do have staff on board that are well versed in cooperatives, well versed in ag businesses, issues across the state of Kentucky. So, working with KCARD is, we generally say, it's a one-on-one process, or maybe a couple of us working with you. We generally like to work with you, where you're comfortable on the side of your business, whether it's in the back room of an office or or around the kitchen table, just talking about your business idea, and really working with you to define what's your vision, what's your goals, and figuring out what's best for you as you move forward. Lots of times, sometimes we have groups who want to start a co-op, and as we go down the process, we realize, hey, the co-op might not be the right idea. Or sometimes we bring it to them, and we realize, hey, there's 3 or 4 of you, there's 4 or 5 of you working on this. Co-op might be the right manner for this effort. To get in touch with KCARD, there's all, kcard.info. I think you can see there's an email address. Maddie can probably reach out to us. We have an intake process where we make sure that the right staff person's assigned to the right person, and or where everybody's working with each other. We're here to help. We want to help. Whether it's working, if you've got a existing co-op that needs maybe somebody can come in and help, we've got an idea of a group who's wanting to start a co-op, or if it's just a general an ag type business idea in Kentucky, call us, email us, social media, all those things. So
Yeah, and I'll put our contact info and all of that in the description of the video. So thanks for listening in, and thanks for all that great information, Brent.
thank you, Maddie.